So, ladies, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I believe I make history today because I'm interviewing an interviewer. So, thank you for the opportunity, by the way. I don't know exactly who to start with. I have, though, one question that has been haunting me for quite a while. What is the next content that will be selling, actually?
Content?
Content, yeah.
What is the next content that we'll be selling?
Yeah, that will be, yeah, like we have words, we have movies, we have...
oh yeah, so what's the next type of...
Type of...
Voice is a big... Okay. Voice is a big opportunity, I think, that people are sort of excited about and talking about, as you see sort of Alexa and Google Home and Siri, and how can brands maybe activate on voice? And I know you might have some thoughts on that.
Do I? Yeah, I mean, kind of. Yeah, podcasts, right? So I was talking to Katie about how advertising started on TVs and radio and paper, and then the digital equivalent, I think, is...
I'll tell you why I ask, because everybody says that traditional television will no longer exist as we know it. So everybody is forecasting on YouTube, everybody is creating content on blogs, on, I don't know, stuff like this. So what's the trend here?
Yeah, so we kind of talked a little bit about this. So we basically said TV, radio, print magazine, and then we started getting the internet, and we got banner ads and really kind of intrusive ads that would pop up and be very annoying. And then we started getting into content, so creating articles and videos that are a lot more seamless, integrated. So you're kind of scrolling through a Facebook feed and you don't even realize that basically the BuzzFeed video that you just watched was actually sponsored by Kia or something like that. And I think what Katie was saying about audio, so there's more and more podcasts that you listen to that are sponsored by a certain brand, and there's all these interesting brand placements inside the podcast. And so you might or might not be able to tell that you're being advertised to, but maybe 2 days later you're going to have the name of a brand in your head and you're not going to know why. It's probably because it was branded content.
Okay. We have some questions from Adrian. So, Katherine, related to the above, select a certain targets group, example, students as ambassadors to have market validation on certain number of users. Sorry?
No, I think actually the first question was...
Exactly.
Yeah, for me.
I switched it by accident, sorry. It's my question. Eventually referred and then address.
Okay. Let me...
sorry.
Okay.
Just
yeah, you can just ask the question. You don't have to put it on the TV. Okay. So, what's your guidance on the best marketing campaign for an early stage consumer to consumer startup that runs as a mobile app? Okay, got it. Okay. Well, so when you're an early stage startup, you usually don't have a marketing budget, right? Well, not really? Okay, yeah. So what people say in Silicon Valley is that the best marketing is kind of getting it's word of mouth, basically. So you get a very small group of people that get really, really passionate about what you're doing, and having that initial test base, like audience base, that is just gung-ho about your product is important, because you get to validate all sorts of product ideas that you have and assumptions, but then also because you can use them as your organic marketer group. So they will then, the idea is that they will love it so much that they will start talking about it naturally. And if they need a little bit of a push, you can actually reach out to them for free and ask them to do it. But that's really kind of the best that you could hope for. The second best that you could hope for is to start getting promoted by the Google Play Store or the App Store, which is actually pretty difficult. And it's easy if you live in Silicon Valley and you have a startup there. But it's the second best thing that you could do. And the third best is, depending what your app is, if it's a gaming app, every single gaming app that I know actually spends insane amounts of money in acquiring users through all sorts of channels, whether they're paying to get ranked better in the App Store, or they're doing app downloads in other apps. And so there's kind of 3 different layers, but I'd say if you're really early stage, then you just have to make sure that your early group is really, really passionate, because there's no point in doing marketing to acquire 1 million users if you haven't figured out how to keep your first 100,000. And then, wait, well, there's...
Thank you. Just to continue on that idea, please, if I may. So if you are a startup that doesn't sell actually a product, but it's a newspaper just like the New York Times, how do you promote your new business or content in order to get more readers or to understand if your content is the right one, especially when you're competing with big names on the market?
Yeah, so to understand you correctly, if you don't have a product, is what you're saying?
You're a newspaper.
Correct.
Newspaper.
Yes. So in order to kind of market our brand, is that what you're asking for? Yeah, so in order to market our brand, I think actually the last couple of years is the first time we launched a brand advertising campaign in a long time. So the Truth Matters is the campaign that we have now. But traditionally, I don't think we approached it in the way that we thought we did need to advertise. And I think what's happening now is no matter how big your brand is, you really need to have a voice. You really need to have sort of a differentiation in the market because there's so many different places where people can go nowadays that even if you were sort of the biggest in your industry or you still sort of need to go to market and make sure that you're telling that message. And I think what's kind of good about that is it's also there's a brand new kind of opportunity for smaller brands to be able to compete kind of on the same level and on the same stage as some of these larger brands which used to control the message. And so now, and I'm sure Anda can speak to this as well, we found smaller companies can be very disruptive when it comes to content marketing and using content as a way. If you look at brands like Bonobos or some of these smaller kind of retail brands, they've really had breakout success with sort of disrupting big industry narratives by having really smart, thoughtful content marketing that they pushed out in sort of unique and differentiated ways. So I think content actually is the way in which all of these people can kind of play together.
So the interesting thing is when you have a brand that doesn't create content, then you hire someone who creates content to come and create content for you. But if you're already creating content, I think that's your marketing plan. You have to come up with content that is good enough that some section of your audience of the world is going to say, I want to take this article and I want to share it. And it's not just about clickbait anymore, as I'm sure you know. It's about like the actual value of what you convey. Yeah, I don't know if you need to like market your brand per se. I think you just need to have really good content. Yeah, over there. No, I think did we answer your question? Yeah, he's good. Okay.
So I was just thinking about what was discussed today and yesterday about artificial intelligence and how this is kind of taking over the world. And I think others are advocating about the Internet of Things. So how your fridge will talk to your phone and your phone to your car and the car to the retailer, and that's how you're going to get your milk or whatever. So just how will advertising work or content work in a world where artificial intelligence is actually taking over and you have devices which are very much connected to one another? So I don't know, it's just a thought starter.
Better?
Yeah, how would that work?
Yeah, I was going to say I think much more better, or much better. I think much more better. I think what will sort of happen is that AI will enable marketers to be really smart about their spends, about sort of seeing when to optimize on a campaign in a radically new way. And I think that's probably the promise of AI for marketers, is just getting really smart and strategic about how much to invest, where to invest, what campaign where, in a way that we probably haven't seen yet.
So I could go on about this forever, but I'll try to keep it really short. I have this really strong belief that AI is only as good as the data that you put into it. So like it's all about the like mechanism, right? It's like some sort of algorithms that you put together, but if the input is shit, then the output is going to be shit. So in order to make AI work, you first have to make sure that you can clean up the data collection and that the stuff that you're putting in is actually good signals from actual people. But the issues that we're being faced with are a little bit more rudimentary, and I think everyone's kind of talking about blockchain and AI and like all these buzzwords, but really there's a lot of bots that are being confused as humans, and those signals are also getting confused by AI. Then there's a lot of kind of crap all over the internet that is being misconstrued as engagement, and you have to find ways to clean that up. And then there's just a lot of distribution partners that aren't being truthful about the performance of the content that they got paid to create. And so you also have to clean that up. So I think there's a bunch of things that you have to clean up to make sure that the data you're putting into any algorithm, whether it's AI or machine learning or whatever, is actually good enough data to create a trusted insight at the other end.
What will be, Katherine, your biggest technological challenge for a newspaper? What do you believe is, I don't know, bugging you most?
Yeah. So I think Google and Facebook would have been that, sort of just, not really sort of being in the game of having all of this data at your fingertips, where the entire world is basically using your platform, and you can, offer that data to marketers. I think publishers are in a much different place where, there might be some data available, and, there's a lot there, but I think what is interesting to us is we have a lot of publishers coming to us looking for media and publishing strategy. As brands need to become their own media companies, as they need to start using content to market themselves or promote themselves, what they need is a really smart strategy. They have to have kind of an always-on approach. And so I think with that, there's obviously the challenge has been sort of competing with Google and Facebook, but I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot more data that tech companies have that will be of use. So whether that is using machine learning to figure out what audiences are reading what, where, when, and then maybe is that of interest to a brand marketer? Of course, if it's about blockchain and it's a brand who's maybe invested in blockchain, what types of topics are they interested in reading about? And so that to us is a challenge, but also I think an opportunity.
Okay. And where do you believe would be like the best segment to invest from the media point of view? What's left to invest in?
You mean in startups?
Yeah.
Okay.
Entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So
what could be explored?
So if you're an investor and you're looking at the media landscape, thinking about what to invest in?
Actually, here we have many people who would like to create their own product, but they don't have actually the idea of what to do.
Okay. So where's the opportunity kind of in the media marketing?
There you go, yeah, thank you.
Whew. Well, I mean, I obviously think there's a big opportunity in what we're doing. So I think, there's everyone's kind of trying to start companies that sound good, and I often caution people to be realistic about what the problems actually are. So I'll give you a quick example. We started the company in Silicon Valley, and literally Silicon Valley is the kind of place where every 3 to 6 months there's another buzzword that is like what the world is about. So it's like hardware, and then it's IoT, and then it's like Bitcoin and blockchain and VR and AR, and every VC goes like, what is your blockchain strategy? Like, what blockchain startup do you have? And so entrepreneurs are like, oh my God, this is the thing that I need to do. And so I'm going to go start a company about it. And 6 months later, it's like a completely different thing. And it's like, oh my God, I have to pivot into that. So long story short, it's really good to kind of talk to customers and ask them on a day-to-day basis, what are the things that really bug you? Like really basic things, like would you like to get a report via email versus to go into a dashboard? Like that's a really simple thing. Or, what as a marketer or as a publisher, what are the things that bug you on a day-to-day that make you less productive? That you would pay some marginal amount for to get better at your job. So I would start there, and then I would come up with a really simple, boiled down version of a product that could solve that problem. And then I would figure out how do you augment that by plugging in all these fancy technologies. And then when you go in front of an investor, that's a completely different story, because you have to take whatever you've built and figure out how to put all these buzzwords around it so that it can actually sell. But that's a different thing. Like, don't start there. Just start with, like, what are the issues that Katie has on a day-to-day basis? Like, what is making her spend 10 hours as opposed to 1 hour on an issue?
Questions, guys?
So speaking about back to content marketing, I sort of have two issues at the moment. Like, number one, everybody in the tech space is producing content and is defining their brands through content. Number two, everybody has all of these tools available where I can track what pages a user visits, I can score them based on what content, I can look at sales, I can look where they come from, how many pages they looked at, what topics they're interested in, so on and so forth, look at time spent, basically all of the data that you talked about. But how can I like differentiate my brand when all of the brands are doing this exact same thing and they all have this technology and they all have great content writers and they're all telling great stories?
Well, that's what I would say you really do have to. If you're sort of in a market where it feels like everybody's doing the same thing, that's a great place to be because someone needs to differentiate themselves. And so that's where I think there's a huge opportunity for, as we spoke about earlier, sort of the art and science is, if we have all of these tools at our disposal, it's about sort of looking at the strategy and revisiting it. If everybody feels like they're doing the same exact thing and not getting results, what's the thing that's different? Do you do voice? Do you start, JP Morgan Chase just launched an engagement with VaynerMedia to have their first voice agency of record. So there's different things you can do to try to be different in this space, to show up for consumers in a different way. But to me, it always comes down to authenticity. So brands have a unique meaning to consumers, and I firmly believe that. If you are a paper company, you have sort of an authentic roots in that business and an expertise that very few other companies can provide to the marketplace. And I think that's where all of your content should come from. That's where your differentiation is. And that's where other companies can't be exactly like you. Even if you're after the same objectives, even if you're both invested in blockchain, the roots of who the company is, I think that's where we're starting to see that people need actual meaning with brands and they want to have a meaningful connection with them. So what is the thing that makes your company that company? And that is the thing that consumers are going to look for and be attached to.
Can I add? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about us as a brand as opposed to us as a technology platform. So in our space, when you're a data company, you look around and everyone's called something like Moat Analytics, Simple Reach, like Basic Insights, like Integral Ad Science, and it's like these big serious names. And so the question for us was like, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you, just from a brand name standpoint, how do you make sure that you're a name that people remember, that it actually kind of like sounds like something, like some sort of noise in nature? And that's why we're called Notch. The second thing is, if you look at the branding kind of design of all these different companies, it's all like blues and grays and very little kind of bright color, and their brands are not playful at all because they deeply believe that in order for people to choose them, for CMOs to choose them, they need to trust them. They need to trust their insight. And so we said, we're going to be different. We're going to have our color be hot pink, and we're just going to have really playful marketing, and we're going to have events. So we decided that we really needed to differentiate ourselves away from kind of just a display. CMOs love talking to other CMOs, so we just bring them together. So we have a series of breakfasts where we talk about failure, and we kind of put a really kind of playful, fun spin on it. And people just show up because other people show up. And so we have 20 CMOs who are all our buyers. And we get to share our stories of failure because one of our values is transparency. And they get to share their stories. And so we form this really genuine connection. And that's a form of marketing. And then we've recently actually started doing our own content marketing. So we'll see how it goes. You read our first content marketing.
Yes.
Was it good?
Yes, the content marketing.
Of content marketing.
Content marketing.
Yeah. Yes. Anyways.
Katherine, is New York Times supporting startups? Like, do you release, I don't know, news like we're expecting somebody to help us on extending, I don't know, some enhancements for the publisher? I only know the newspaper. Do you have any other interests, or I don't know that?
Sure. So we've worked with Onda and Notch. I think, for us, especially in the marketing space, we're looking to see who we can partner with for the unique needs of brands, especially when we are doing some of our consulting projects or when we do have a content strategy project that we're helping with brands. Sometimes it makes sense to bring in certain partners. So oftentimes, that will be a startup also. So yes, we are doing that.
Okay. And is New York Times the only partner in news? Like
I hope not. No. Okay. Well, so we actually sell directly to brands, and we make a big deal out of just being kind of a Switzerland of data. And so we partner with New York Times, and we partner with the Wall Street Journal.
How difficult was it to reach the New York Times?
Well, I think it's impossible if you're not in New York. Like I'm just going to be very straightforward. Like, you meet if you meet Katie here and then you think, oh my God, yes, we're going to partner with the New York Times. But Katie goes back to New York and she has 50 companies like Notch that are calling her and they show up in their office, and so it's actually really hard. And you have to be where your customers are. So being in Silicon Valley was good because we got the initial investment from investors there, and it's almost impossible to raise money from Silicon Valley unless you're there. Like unless you're some sort of moonshot company that can deliver like $50 million within 3 months, then sure, you can raise money from anyone, anywhere. But then kind of move to New York because our customers were there and it's impossible to get to them. But like in general, by the way, all media companies are open to innovation and they're open to startups. It's just a really complicated structure to navigate. So it took me like years, a year at least, until I found you. Right? Like I was just meeting all these people at the New York Times. I was like, who's going to be the person that's going to actually be our champion? And then I met you.
Guys, questions? This is about you guys, right? I mean, I can ask forever.
So a second question is around a generation change. How can you comment on the preferences of the, I don't know, the new generation that is coming? So I'm from the 80s. So who's coming from the 90s? What do they read? What do they enjoy? What do they look into in brands? What do they look? Yeah, these millennials or however they are called, the ones after the millennials, let's say.
Yeah, so in our findings and research, which we have a huge, from the Times perspective, a huge sort of millennial audience, but looking even at Gen Z, I think they are more open to branded experiences is something that we've seen, and just want sort of a different experience. They want very seamless experiences, so want to be able to not even think about an obtrusive ad coming in. And something we didn't necessarily touch on before, but this idea of sort of the subscription model and how we're sort of all moving towards a subscription model, which is very top of mind for us at the Times. But also I think for a lot of cloud companies, a lot of people in the space figuring out how to engage consumers, and which will also mean probably engaging with Gen Z as well, and sort of getting into that mindset of subscribing for things that matter to you. And what does the role of content marketing look like and advertising look like, especially to that demographic? I think what we're going to see is it needs to help the experience. It needs to be seamless. It needs to be experiential. Voice is a huge one, and I know I've talked about it a couple times now, but there's super interesting things going on in that space with voice activation, how brands are integrating and building for Alexa and things like this. And I think generations even younger than Gen Z are starting to realize that and become accustomed to it, especially when you see all that news about kids just ordering things through Alexa because they can. I think that type of seamless instant gratification will be top of mind for younger generations too, and it's how can brands kind of get in there and play on that also.
Thank you. How did you convince your sponsors that the new way for marketing and for them to get promoted is not through Google, Facebook, but through content marketing?
Well, I think they're still using Google and Facebook. I don't think that's out of the equation for sure. But what I think that we are finding is that there was a huge excitement for Google and Facebook and a huge excitement for just distributing content and getting it in front of the right people. But if you're not moving them and you're not saying anything different, you're saying the same thing as everyone else, and you look the same and it sort of comes out sounding the same, not much will probably happen. In fact, I guarantee you nothing will happen because you aren't standing out, you aren't different, you aren't exciting, you didn't make them have an emotional connection that to me, is one of the core tenets of advertising and marketing. And so that's where I think, Google and Facebook are part of it, but I think we're seeing that they definitely aren't the whole of it. So I do think we're moving towards this more sort of specialized, creating, sort of assembly or I don't know what the word is. It's like a board of marketers for your brand that can sort of help be your ambassadors. And it's not just going to be one agency and it's not just going to be one social network. It's going to be all of these different players sort of figuring out the best strategic way forward.
I think there's something to be said about having really amazing creative, and so you have a particular partner to help you with that. And Google and Facebook are still going to be important channels to reach people, but not to create content. Like I don't think they'll ever be the folks that you go to create amazing content or find your message. I think they're going to be distribution platforms. That being said, they are struggling. Like I know a lot of brands who have pulled their YouTube spend and have seen no difference on actual sales outcomes. Our largest customer just decided to cancel all Facebook spend. Like it's actually a trend that's really fascinating to watch, and it makes me excited because it was kind of boring, like, oh, they're going to take over the world. Like every year it was like, oh, Facebook and Google is going to take, and like finally now you're seeing slowly that there's, especially with Gen Z, I think there's more and more of a shift to, no, like don't lie to me. I know that you're bullshitting me with your advertising. Actually give me a story, tell me something of value, and do it in a way that doesn't interrupt my experience. So I think that's pretty cool and powerful.
Do I get a prize if I put so many questions? Just an idea for next year. Yeah. So I think it's a question about values. So as marketeers, we are quite responsible around what we promote and how we promote it. And I think when we are in business, we are also responsible for the impact that we create on the world. So it's just a question not necessarily related to content, maybe more around marketing and how businesses operate, so around business ethics. But I would be very interested in knowing your thoughts around, okay, so how would you as a marketeer and you as an entrepreneur advise marketeers and entrepreneurs to think of the key success indicators of their business?
Okay, so I didn't understand how important values were, or like really intentionally trying to build a culture inside of your company until we went from like 5 people to 35, and that shift for us happened pretty fast. And I started realizing that I personally will not be able to go up to everyone and make sure that they're in line with our values, and that those values had to be written and said and put on posters and talked about and magnified. In every team meeting we had to remind everyone. But the most important thing is they had to be values that resonated with everyone internally, and values that anyone else who would join would feel like they're being included into. And the other piece I think that was really interesting to me is making sure that the values we have internally are also the values that we share with our customers. And so our values are transparency, inclusiveness, and relentlessness. And they all speak to something that's really core to who we are. The relentlessness is about never giving up no matter what. And we have so many examples of that, like whether it's in our work for our customers or whether it's in trying to get a customer that keeps saying no, we're like, okay, we understand that a no is a no, but, you know, or an investor that keeps saying no. I mean, God, like I think every investor has said no to me before they said yes. And the inclusiveness is making sure that we're actually an ever-growing culture. It's not just about me. I think founders tend to think that their companies are about them and they need to be represented 100%. But companies grow and change, and it's not about you. And so I think making it about everyone else is important. And transparency, because we are trying to bring transparency to the digital marketing ecosystem. But then similarly, internally, whenever we have an issue as a company, I actually try to bring it to the team. There's a lot of startups where they're running out of money and no one ever tells everyone else. They just kind of get fired one day, or you know, they have really big issues with an investor and no one ever tells anyone. And so I try to actually bring people into what we do. And those 3 things have made us, I'm going to brag for a second, but we just won Inc. Best Places to Work in the US, which is insane because we're like a really small company and you know, you don't really get that.
They do have a cool bar though.
We have a bar.
Inc., and it's really great.
Also, that's how you build a business, you build a bar. No, but I think the values actually kind of are at the core of how we manage to get there. And so, yeah, that's my thing.
Yeah, and for me, I would just say that's, you know, why I work at the New York Times. I think the idea that marketing needs to have values, I think, to me, that's at the core of content marketing. It's where you go to find out what types of content marketing pieces you should be saying, and they should be rooted in authenticity. It should be about what the brand is actually trying to achieve versus what the brand wants people to think that they want to achieve, because that's where the good stories are. So as soon as you start, you know, finding made-up stories, or as soon as you start entering a world where it's if it's greenwashing or sort of using CSR objectives to just kind of talk about things versus actually showing the proof that a company is doing something, that to me is where I think marketing is its strongest, is when it actually shows people the values that the company has. And for me, being at the New York Times was marketing at the Times is much different than marketing at a small agency. And I think that was what was attractive to me, because we have a whole philosophy that's, we have a newsroom-driven approach to content, which means everything needs to be fact-based, everything needs to be QA'd and checked. And I think the more values that your marketing sort of ties back to or can draw from, the better overall it will be, because people can feel it. So,
Katherine, so we have all watched Back to the Future. So from your own imagination, how are you expecting people to consume your content? Content. There you go.
Content means happy.
Yeah.
In the future?
My accent fails me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I don't want to say voice again, but I really do think the podcast, I think a lot of things will be made.
They have holograms and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And
maybe there's, conductive ink where you can actually play with the text, and sort of maybe it's hyper-personalized papers where you get, the news delivered directly to you, and it's based on kind of what you're interested in. So I think the future is huge. I think in the immediate future, we're definitely invested in audio. So The Daily is kind of one of our biggest podcasts now. And I don't know if you guys have heard it, but it's really good. It's basically, a podcast about behind the news. And I think we're looking to kind of expand that and to make the New York Times resonate with people who listen versus read too. So.
Okay, we have questions.
I think we're almost done, by the way. So,
okay.
Right? Okay.
Regarding freemium-based business model startups, what's the best way to present your app as being most valuable as freemium? Example, a health startup wanting to help diabetics, but at the same time get some sustainable revenue.
Is this for Katie or for me? Okay.
Who raised it? Maybe they can explain.
So as far as I have seen, you have worked with a lot of companies who wanted to share their story. So how can you share your story of your company, say a company that wants to help, and being invested in it while remaining a company that wants to help, not necessarily generate a tremendous amount of revenue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't want to go back to content again when it comes to this, but I will. So just this example of a health startup wanting to help diabetics, but at the same time get some sustainable revenue. You basically, content that has utility will keep people coming back, and creating content that actually gives information to diabetics that will help improve their lives, whether it's recipes or things like that. And then in terms of sustainable revenue, that's where you would need those sort of extra added-on moments that people would find worth paying for, whether that's a calculator or something that's actually actionable. To me, I found those have been sort of the best ways when you do have some of these kind of models where you want people to pay for something. You also just have to give them the information that they maybe can't find other places, or it's so good that they keep returning to it on their own, and it's free.
So we measure Colgate's Content Hub, and it's really interesting because before, I didn't really know that Colgate had a Content Hub before we started measuring Colgate's Content Hub, but when I was looking up, I had some issue with toothpaste anyways, and I was looking up toothpaste issues, very specific toothpaste issues, and I actually weirdly randomly landed on a page that we were measuring, which was really funny. But the thing is, that type of content is very, very utility driven, and if I find myself there, it's because you've done a really good job with SEO, which I think is an important one. And the second thing, once I find myself there, you have to figure out what are this very specific, boiled down elements of value that you can convey to me so that I continue staying engaged up to the end. And I think if you manage to do that, people are actually going to come back to you and look for your product. So Colgate, whenever they do content about how to cure mouth sores or whatever, they actually recommend their product, right, in doing that. So that's how you can kind of walk the line between helping a diabetic, and then also recommending your product as a potential solution to what they're looking for.
Can we take one more? Are you up to it? Sure. Okay. What are some great ways in which you can do marketing, generate content for your already existing customers?
Well, I was going to say ask them. So to me, one of the questions that we get all the time is marketers like, I don't know what my consumer wants. I don't know if we're reaching them right. And I think one great thing you can do that's pretty easy actually is to literally ask them, do you like this piece of content? And I sort of want to hand it back to you to talk a bit more about this, to sort of just gauge whether they're getting the message, whether it's useful for you, or useful for them and useful for you to keep making. So whether that's a survey or
not. Well, so like one of the biggest beliefs we have is that it's important to look at how someone engages with content, but also to ask them, was this actually useful for you? So we do that a lot, and so we kind of, I guess, on our branded content also ask people through our product what they thought, but we do this for a lot of other companies. The other way you can generate really great content, and this is something that we've started doing recently, is we've started creating industry reports about certain things. So, for example, we work with marketers, content marketers, and they want to know what's the kind of the newest and most exciting brand that's doing content within the finance vertical or within the beauty vertical. And so we just look for it and create content around it and then send it out via email. And it's really, really successful. People click on it. We've built a massive email database from it. So it's another cool way to do it.
Okay, thank you so much.